3 higher ed authors, 100 plus college and university presidents, dozens of actionable insights for academic leaders. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, is now available on Amazon. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio back with you again in another episode here, fresh out of our experience at eLive. That's Elysian Live in New Orleans back at the end of March. Very exciting time to talk to leaders using technology products, especially as the conversation around artificial intelligence continues to evolve. And we get exposure to the almost you can't live without moments of AI as you run things through ChatGPT and others. My favorite is Barely.ai for anyone that's not used Barely.ai before. What I love about Barely is that if you pull up an article that you want to read, Barely runs over the top of it, and it's bear like a bear in the woods, Bearly, and you run it right over the top of this article you want to read, and it gives you an executive summary. So it tells you all about what this article is about, and you don't even need to read it. It gives you the executive summary, so I can get through like 10 articles in about 5 minutes at breakfast and see which ones I decide to go further into and what they're about. Pretty cool. So these AI things are doing lots of things for us. One way I suggest you don't use AI is that you actually go and buy my book that we just put out called Commencement, the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, which of course, as you know, because I've said it now 100 times, is based upon the insights of the first 125 presidents we interviewed on this podcast. I actually gave a presentation to a college Kate and I did about a week ago, and there were 936 people that attended. So we were so flattered, honored, and humbled by the response of the book. But enough about me, because I could sit here and talk for an hour about myself, but that's super narcissistic, and nobody wants to hear that. What I'm going to do instead is bring in my guest co-host. He hasn't been around in a while. In fact, he's a ghost. He kind of shows up when he is around, and then he disappears. And we've got him today, ladies and gentlemen. He is John Farrar. He is the Director of Education at the small organization called Google. John, how are you?
Good, Joe. Good to be back.
John, where you been, man? Where you been?
We've been traveling all over the place. The demands for, education, innovation never end, as you know, right? And so
I do.
We've been traveling the country quite a bit, but it's good to be grounded. I'm excited to go into ASU GSV next week to
Nice.
a bunch of other leaders there. And so, yeah, it's been a busy time, but it's always good to be back on the EdUp experience. And I'm very excited about today's guest.
Well, that's a great build-up, and I'm going to bring him right in because I know he's got a lot to say. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. He is Dr. Dick Senese. He is the president at Capella University. Dick, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you both?
It's another day in paradise over
here. It is indeed. Another day on Zoom.
That's it. Another day on Zoom. But you know what? A good way to be on Zoom with one another, because we don't have to have a meeting. We get to have a podcast conversation all about you, Dick, and the work, more importantly, the work of Capella University. Mm-hmm. And for those, let's just assume for a moment that somebody is here and hasn't heard of Capella University before. Sure. Let's act as if that is where we're starting. So tell us about Capella. What does Capella University do, and how do you do it?
Sure, sounds good. So Capella University was founded 30 years ago. So this is our 30th anniversary. Seems like a long time for us, but in the world of higher ed, we are still young and innovative. Capella was founded to provide high quality education for working adults. Primarily, we're a graduate school, so most of our learners are in master's or doctoral programs. We do have bachelor's programs as well. And we have been focused on competency-based education long before it was a popular term. All of our curriculum is competency-based. We align the programs and the courses, all the learning outcomes, all the assignments, all the assessments are aligned to competencies that are expected in the workplace by those holding the credential they're studying for.
Amazing.
It is amazing. Thank you, Joe. I agree. We use authentic assessments. So no matter the format of the assessment asks the learner to apply knowledge, skills, or professional dispositions to demonstrate their understanding of that competency, to demonstrate their ability to use what they've learned in some context, professional context, often obviously a simulated context in the course room. But we're really proud of all the work. We have two learning formats. One is called Guided Path, which is a kind of traditional online, if we can call, online traditional. And then one is called FlexPath, which is also known as direct assessment.
FlexPath has been around for a long time. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years, and I can't tell you when FlexPath came in. You probably know better than me, but I do know that if somebody says FlexPath, I go, oh yeah, that's Capella. So you've done a good job of branding that for adult students. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Talk about FlexPath and its importance to the adult student, why it's so valued.
Sure. So FlexPath is 10 years old this year. As a matter of fact, we started in 2013. Yeah. And adult learners, one of the greatest challenges adult learners have is they have life commitments that are not easily set aside so that they can adhere to the schedule of an institution like a traditional college experience may have been, or maybe that you went through or that I went through. So FlexPath really provides the maximum flexibility that we can while maintaining high quality competency-based curriculum and education. So for example, FlexPath is a format, so we have programs in Guided Path and FlexPath. When learners first enroll in a course, the first thing they do actually is schedule themselves. So when are they going to complete the assignments, these competency demonstrations? So all of that is under their control. FlexPath uses a subscription model, so a 12-week period where a learner can be concurrently registered for up to 2 courses. So perhaps, you go faster because you have either more time, maybe you're a teacher and you're doing this on a summer break or something, so you're able to go faster, or maybe you've been in bookkeeping your whole life, and so now you're getting bachelor's in business, and those concepts you're learning are just coming a little bit easier for you in that particular course. Or maybe you go slower because you need a little more time because things in your life are going on, family events or just work events, or you just want to go slower. So you can take the time and pace yourself how you'd like. And, if you don't finish in that first subscription period, you can carry a course over to one more period. So it really maximizes flexibility, which increasingly in the lives of adult learners is more and more important as a value proposition.
True.
We agree. And I'm going to hand it to John because knew he was excited to talk with you today, Dick. And, we're excited to get him back on. So no pressure, John, but your questions better be good.
We'll do our best, Joe. Dick, you mentioned the competency-based learning, right? There's been a lot of chatter in the last several years about reskilling, upskilling for the workforce. I know you've got thoughts on this. I know there was an article from the Atlantic not that long ago that said 11% of employers feel like graduates are ready to go on day one. And I think it kind of speaks to some of the approaches that Capella has taken historically and maybe is thinking about going forward. But how do you see universities playing a role maybe beyond traditional degree programs, or how do they enhance existing degree programs to kind of hopefully shore up that gap for employers and make it so that when they get there on day one, they hit the learning curve even harder?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I think there's a couple things that we're doing and maybe higher ed could learn from more broadly and employers could take a closer look at. I think first, is the competency map itself. So in the competency-based education, you identify a number of competencies for that program that people are expected to have. Then you backwards design those into courses. But it's never one and done, right? You have to scaffold the learning. So the same competency is represented in multiple courses at varying levels or various levels or different aspects of it. So it's not for the faint of heart to do this kind of curriculum design. And your faculty have to be deeply committed to it. right? And so if you have those going for you, you're able to have a robust assessment model of those competencies. Many places might use a either or kind of assessment. Person met it or they didn't. We have 4 levels of assessment on a competency demonstration. We have very clear guidelines and scoring guides about this so that employers can have confidence and learners can have confidence that what they're learning can be immediately applied. We actually ask our learners that question in the end of course evaluations. Can you apply what you've learned in this course to your workplace or your community? Right? And in both cases, we get really high positive responses on those questions. So making that transparent to employers and learners, helping learners understand sort of what they've learned, right? Bring them up to see the trees here in the forest and give them the tools to speak to employers. So we use a competency map that learners can use to discuss the competencies of the courses they're in. Our transcripts in the FlexPath model format list the competencies. So they could literally bring an unofficial transcript or an official one, I suppose, in with their boss and say, hey, here are the things I'm learning. How do you see this applying? And you can have a conversation then right there and then with the employer. I think another thing that's really exciting that we are getting more and more interested in and trying pilots in is, work embedded learning. How can people use opportunities that are in their workplace every day to either augment or help their learning journey? And how can we recognize that within a course? It's not easy, right? Similar approach might be to set up, like an internship or apprenticeships, those kinds of things. But again, with adult learners, they have a lot of commitments they're balancing against. And their schedules are like a combination of, Jenga and Tetris or something, right? So adding one more thing, it better be really high quality and of value.
I think it's a great point in terms of how much they're juggling, and maybe that maybe there's a role for universities to play as it relates to my next question, which is the rise of short courses, certificates, increasing, I guess, currency as qualification in some of those. Do you feel like there's we will see a time where we'll see more of that, where potentially you graduate from Capella and you're also certified by maybe the top 3 or 3 of the leaders in the industry or vocation that you are pursuing? Do you feel like that's?
I would love to see that. Capella is a leader in credit for prior learning. So, for example, there's this little organization you work for that has certain certifications, right? So if someone can demonstrate to us that they've earned that, and we can verify that, that can count as coursework, right? And it can count toward academic credit in their program. And anytime you give a returning adult learner recognition, credit for prior learning, that's motivational. All the research says those learners will do better. They will persist better.
Yes.
Now, could we do the reverse? Of course we could. Like there's no reason, John, you and I can have a conversation about, hey, here's what's happening in these courses. How about Google certify them? Mm-hmm. Just do it in the reverse, right? And that kind of real partnership makes a ton of sense. Now, the other thing that people have to recognize is that learners live in, economic sheds. People in, the area of Minnesota where I grew up in, are, unlikely to work for some of the big national brands. It's a rural, remote, relatively rural and a more remote area. So how do those employers in those areas learn about these things as well? And to the extent that we can provide transparency into the competencies, I think that gives learners the ability to have the conversation with employers.
How do you keep that straight, Dick? Because this is one of the more common questions that we ask here. It's an extension of what John asked, because when you're talking about a Google cert, right? We understand that. Yep. We use Google. There's brand recognition there. We know what it means. But the rest of the market, and Credential Engine is an organization that kind of maps out different credentials, and there's over 1 million. Mm-hmm. For the learner and for the employer, unless you're a brand recognized certification and you've got the power behind you, there's a lot of uncertainty within the non-credit space, the credentialing space. Good thing about higher education, one good thing, there's lots of good things, but people talk about some of the bad things that higher ed is. We're slow and whatever. It's easy to be critical, but there is structure. Whether you agree with that structure or not, you understand that if you do X, you end up with Y and so on. And in the other space, and the non-credential space, skill stacking and otherwise, there isn't a lot of infrastructure around how to understand it for the student or for the employer, but we all know we need it. As a president, how do you keep your eyes on that and what the future is going to hold, knowing that there is a lot of confusion?
Well, the way we do it is, the competency-based idea, the idea that the curriculum should be competency-based and those competencies should be professionally relevant is deeply embedded in every aspect of Capella University. So when our faculty do program reviews, they're asking that question. When we build a course, we know what the evidence was that suggested to us that this competency was important. So we have a well-structured approach to that. Our approach to assessment has been recognized 2 times now by the National Institute on Learning Outcomes for Learning Outcomes Assessment. So I'm really confident about our approach to it. I think what institutions of higher education need to learn is to take all that input, all that information, discern it and distill it into manageable chunks of learning, right? And then, like you say, employers need to start using that language in the job descriptions. I mean, one source for us, quite frankly, are job descriptions. How do people describe jobs that require an MBA with a marketing specialization? Well, that's one possible source of evidence, right, that we can use. So that linkage is what's really hard. There was a study, I forget exactly who was involved in it. I know UPSEA was, and they talked to employers about who do they trust to verify, right? Because that's the issue. Who is verifying this, right? Well, if Google's verifying it, I have, much more confidence in it than an organization I've never heard of. But employers in this study, at least, and wasn't a big national survey, it was kind of like interviews, they relied on themselves. They said the job interview, right, which research shows is the least reliable way to assess someone's actual competency levels.
Are you serious?
So the more we can talk about competency-based education, the more we can show the value of it, the more we can get schools to engage in direct assessment programs like FlexPath, which have some remarkable outcomes, really remarkable outcomes on time to complete, on affordability, on all the things we care about. I think we just need to keep the conversation going and, find a way to provide incentives to employers and universities to work more closely together, because that handoff between completing a credential of whatever size and scope to career outcome, there's a gap there in how that handoff works.
You know that the world of higher education is experiencing evolutions and revolutions. You want to be part of the progress. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education with insights from more than 100 college and university presidents, will show you how. Get your copy of Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education now on Amazon right away. We think you're going to love it. It's
Amazing.
John.
Yeah, Dick, look, I follow you on Twitter, so you post some interesting stuff.
True.
I'm gonna go back to the adult learner, and one of the things that you did post on Twitter around networking. I always joke with people, and they always, sometimes you get that question: if you could talk to your 25-year-old, 22-year-old, 18-year-old self, what would you tell them? And I would say, like, be a better networker earlier, right? As we talk about as we talk about adult learners, though, to your point, there's a lot going on there. What do you think we can do as universities or maybe as employers to help on that front to encourage that kind of networking? So we have people exploring job possibilities via professionals in their disciplines while they're going to accomplish a degree, and not just post graduation or in the months immediately where they're leading up to when they want to get employment. I know you've got some thoughts here. Would love to explore that with you.
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. If you can't tell, I'm a sort of very data-driven person. I'm a psychologist by training. And all the research shows that it's weak ties and social networks that help people advance in their careers and in even their sort of community involvement, right? So these weak ties are those acquaintances, right? A friend of a friend works here and you go and talk to them. We do a lot to promote the concept of informational interviewing amongst our learners. So we're doing a career strategy week coming up here soon, and we're going to feature an alumna of Capella University who's a noted executive recruiter and has written a book on the 20-minute informational interview. And she's done a talk for us that we recorded, we give it to learners. I'm hoping that we find ways to build those kinds of activities into the curriculum, right? You have to take a sort of curricular lens on it. So it's not, career development work per se, but if you're going to get award academic credit, but there is a way to do that, right? And I think employers, need to recognize that in today's world, people's loyalty to stay with an employer is shorter and shorter. Giving people a little bit of opportunity, creating the expectation that they network, not to look for another job, but just to keep their eye on the horizon of their field. That's really important. And the power of these informational interviews is really strong. And, I completely agree with you. The power of weak ties, of social networking, it really can almost not be understated on the impact on people's lives.
Yeah, I sit on a couple of business school boards, and we talk about what people generally refer to as soft skills. I kind of hope we rename them as success skills, because I really feel like that is what we're talking about here, networking chief among them, and understanding kind of how to navigate certain situations, work in teams, what have you. But I feel like networking can help shape a lot of those skills through mentorship and guidance. Yeah, completely with you there. You wanted Joe? You got.
Well, I was going to say, what do we call those, Dick? With soft skills, success skills, power skills?
We don't need to rename everything. We could just call them interpersonal skills, like we did when I taught interpersonal communication a long time ago.
That was, yeah, I mean, right.
They're just interpersonal skills. They're people skills. We know that any group depends on two categories of behavior for success. One is task-oriented behaviors, like you got to get the thing done, but the other is called maintenance behaviors. It's all these interpersonal skills, right? And the value of that is really important, because you don't get much time to make a first impression. One of the things that we're doing at Capella is really focusing on decreasing the interpersonal distance between faculty and learners, and learners, so that even though we are distance education, almost all asynchronous, except in a handful of cases, we still want to decrease that interpersonal distance. So people know that there's an actual human on the other end of the technology, right? Because that is what is going to motivate any of us, is human connection. Right?
Is that the faculty presence or the social presence within the classroom?
That's a part of it. It's social presence, because that means I care. If I show up, I care. If a friend shows up for you, Joe, that friend cares, right? If they do what they said they were going to do in the time they said they were going to do it in. If they notice, our faculty, we have some proprietary tools that allow faculty to know if a learner is late on an assignment or that sort of thing, and faculty can send a video to them, and some of our faculty have been very creative. It's kind of like a Where's Waldo kind of video I remember seeing, because we did a little demonstration, sort of a mini Academy Awards kind of thing, right, for some of these videos. But there are literally thousands and thousands of these videos that faculty are producing because it's fun for them too. And learners can see the caring and the motivation of the faculty. So I think we do need to focus on those skills. I think we need to just recognize they are, as important in many cases. And once you have a certain level of technical proficiency, then that becomes the differentiator. That's why they're more important, right? The statistician in me says it accounts for more of the variance, right? So it becomes more important.
Yeah,
I missed the variance part.
I guess I just selfishly wish we celebrated it more, right?
Yeah.
I think the stat from employers is those soft skills, or maybe I'll start using your term of interpersonal skills, are the things that their employee base needs the most on, right? Yep. And I do feel like we focus a lot on maybe hard skills or a lot on, STEM occupations, what have you, but it is still those interpersonal skills that make organizations go and make individuals successful within their capacities.
And employers have that opportunity to develop, professional development programs that emphasize those. It doesn't have to be that difficult or onerous, right? I mean, first, supervisors need to be able to have crucial conversations about letting folks know what's going well and letting folks know where maybe there are areas to improve, Now, we've built a number of employability skills into our general education curriculum. For us, most of our undergraduate learners come with a lot or all of their general educations completed, but still we wanted to make sure that if you were going to complete your general education curriculum at Capella, you were exposed to employability skills.
Dick, do you think you got my mind turning a little bit, because I'm thinking about your exchange with John and interpersonal skills. Let's just say interpersonal skills. Was there ever a time where those weren't the most important skills, and why were they minimized and now maybe need more attention? Was it the tech boom that pushed a bunch of people into technical training and hard skills? And, I almost think backwards and go, at what point did we lose focus on those success skills to the point where we need to bring them front and center so much?
They probably always existed at managerial and above levels in organizations. I think as you move from an industrial age to an information age, you can imagine that, somebody who's working a production line and has a certain task to perform in a very sort of replicable way, maybe the interpersonal skills are less needed or valuable in that role. But as you move into the information age, and many, many more jobs, entry-level jobs and jobs slightly above entry level, require discernment, human communication, interaction, the ability to read a room, some amount of emotional intelligence.
Nailed it.
That changes what the expectation is and what the differentiator is for employee success and professional success. That would be my supposition anyway.
It's interesting, right? I want to go backwards to talk about PLA a little bit, prior learning assessment, or credit for prior learning. One of the, as you know, Dick, because you're well up to date on what's happening in higher ed, everybody, and not everybody, but I say as a generalization, many are moving in to try to serve 39 million students with some college and no degree, because you have a declining birth rate, the enrollment cliff is coming, there's less 18-year-olds going to college, blah, 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 blah. We know all those things. I think there is a lack of understanding on what it takes to serve that population, where you don't just wake up one day and go, oh, wow, we're used to serving this student, and now we're going to start serving these adult students over here. There's so many changes that have to take place, even to the point of realizing that if you aren't going to grant prior learning to a student in the form of credit, you could be offending them in a certain way where they go, what do you mean you don't value my X years in this business? And you're not going to give me anything for it. I'm going to go to Capella because Capella will. And so there's this lack, I feel like, of a general, everybody wants to do it, but it's not everybody can serve an adult student because the policies are different, the cadences are different, the replication schedules are different, the expectations are different. What do you have to say about that? You've been doing this for a long time.
I two things. First, I think you're absolutely right. And an institution of higher education that wants to serve adult learners needs to take an honest look at itself from the outside in. What does it look like from an adult learner's perspective? Yeah. Everything from the imagery on the websites to the kinds of policies you're talking about, the scheduling of courses, the flexibility that's allowable. Are all the online courses asynchronous or synchronous? You know, are you doing this, hyperflex where I met with a colleague at a local community college the other day, and all of their courses now, you can do either at the student's choice, go to an in-person session, do something synchronously online, or do something asynchronously throughout the term. You can just vary those things. So I think that is a really creative and very difficult thing to pull off for a lot of reasons. So you have to look at the culture and what are you doing to create a culture that learns to see things that way, right? What do you call things? Like, do you stand behind, at a liberal arts college I used to teach at, learners would call me Professor Senese, students would call me Professor Senese, right? That creates a little bit of distance. I taught at an adult serving institution in a face-to-face environment for a number of years, and nobody did that. We were very informal. We actually met in office buildings, conference rooms at night, right? All those things. One other point I want to go back to, though, Joe, is the example you used was somebody who had a lot of grit. Is they were kind of offended, right? And it activated this kind of energy, like, I'm not going to put up with that. I'm going to go find someone else. So while I want to help that person, I worry more about the person who hears that message, and they're deflated.
Yes.
They can't. They lose hope, right? We often talk about time and money, but hope is really what drives most of us, right? Most of our actions are hope-based, like some kind of future motivating state, right? And you take that away from someone, that to me is really a harmful thing to do to somebody who can otherwise succeed.
Yeah, it's such a good point because, a big part of serving students from a retention standpoint is confidence building. Right? And I've talked about this before. You're building confidence, right? The reason for wanting to take a stop out or quit school is associated with some type of an event. Like I had this come up and now I can't do this, or this assignment got too hard or I can't do that, or I had an interaction with somebody that made me do this. And to save that student, most of the time, it's psychological. It's if you quit on yourself, then, don't quit on yourself, or, and if you don't understand the adult student and what they're dealing with on a daily basis and how those policies, how they interact with policies and procedures around your university, you just end up losing them. Exactly. Because, you know what I mean? They just disappear. And there's less loyalty because their loyalty is to a family and kids sometimes. And so it's like, well, I've got to do what I got to do. It's just a lot harder than people think it is in higher education. We're seeing so many try now, but there's infrastructure that has to be built.
There infrastructure and culture change, right?
Yeah.
And for adult learners, someone who's successful in their career, they're highly competent, they're an independent actor, right? And then they get treated like they're incompetent somehow. And that can be, from my own personal experience, let me tell you, that can be really frustrating. I served as an aide to a U.S. senator and had, access to lots of material, documents, all kinds of things. And when I returned to school, I needed to like bring, this is way back when, right? I need to bring this form. This form had to get from one building to another building by the end of the day. Well, intercampus mail was not going to do it.
Yikes!
I was actually on crutches.
Yikes!
I said, I'll do it. Oh, I can't give you this form.
Yikes!
I'm like, I returned from being an aide to a US senator. I've had access to confidential documents in the government. I think I can carry this form from one place to another. And ultimately I won that argument, but I have a certain amount of grit and persistence in me.
I bet you do. Go ahead, John.
I know we're the time is flying here, so I've got one more question, Dick.
Right.
We run a lot of survey data against students at Google, and over the overwhelming majority of students now say that they're making university choices based on how big DEI is as a part of the overall strategic plan of their institution, right? We know Capella has been a leader on this front. I hear you and see you post a lot about it. What more can we be done? What is Capella doing? What does the future look like for Capella on that front? And what do you think universities need to be thinking about as an ecosystem on the DEI?
Sure.
That's 3 questions.
It's a lot of questions, but it's a big important area. Thanks for your comment about Capella. We are doing a lot. I'm, been involved in civil and human rights activities most of my adult life. I'm a officer and board member of LGBTQ leaders in higher ed. But we need to do more, right? I mean, the whole nation saw what happened a mile from where I live when George Floyd was murdered, and the ensuing call for justice, the ensuing call for actual work on these issues. And one thing I always want to do is take apart the acronym DEI, because then it becomes an empty word, right? You're talking about ensuring that there's a diversity of people, meaning certainly we want to look at racial, ethnic diversity, age diversity, diversity with regard to ability, diversity with regard to a whole number of things, right? Because all of us have an intersectional identity. All of us do. And we have to recognize and honor that. And we have to be committed to that. Then we have to be committed to inclusive culture, so that if somebody is a leader because of their cultural background, for example, that culture's view of leadership is leading from behind or from the middle, that person doesn't get lost in the hyper macho kind of leadership profiles that we can become accustomed to. And then lastly, equity, right? We have to really know what we mean by that, right? There's equitable outcomes, whether that's in your organization around salary, promotion, or as a university with regard to learner profiles. One of the things that was really great about our recent study we did on FlexPath is we saw that we now have 20,000 graduates of FlexPath, right? And we looked at our ability to stake claims on time to complete and affordability. And we saw that FlexPath benefited both learners who self-identify as white and learners who self-identify as Black.
Fantastic.
Right? And we did that as you might imagine from my earlier comment on variance, we used a statistical approach that allowed for qualified comparisons. But the point is, you have to be willing to look at that, and you have to be willing to look yourself in the mirror and say, what can we do? What can I do more of? It means, again, looking from the outside in. If somebody with, who comes from a very diverse background or looks at Capella, what does the curriculum look like? What are the examples used in our human service courses, right? What are the names that are used in the assessments? What's it like for someone who says, for someone who hears, oh, your name is too hard to pronounce, right? All of these things matter. They all send messages, and we have to look very carefully at all of it. And I'm proud of our work. We have a fantastic chief diversity officer at Capella. We have a very active and engaged employee base. We have a commission on diversity, equity, and inclusion that are working across various work streams, with clear metrics and outcome goals. So all of that work is really important. It just can never be lip service, and it can never be glossed over, because you want to talk about interpersonal work, being able to have honest, real conversation about the inclusivity of the workplace with somebody, and creating a space for someone who has been in a power down position in their whole life feels free to say, hey, I didn't feel included. If you can get to that point, you've really accomplished something.
100%.
We love that. Thank you for that, Dick. And we have two final questions that we ask of every single guest. Number one, what did we not say about Capella University that needs to be said today? Anything that you were hoping you get out that we just, John sometimes he goes down these rabbit holes of questions and he just leads people in the wrong direction. No, he's great. But anything that you want to say, the mic is yours to plug your staff, new programs, anything you want. And then talk to us about what you think the future of higher education holds.
All right, sounds good. I think the things we touched on but deserve emphasis is the incredible outcomes we're seeing with FlexPath in terms of, 50% of the bachelor's folks in FlexPath are going faster than their guided path counterparts. About 36% are going faster in master's programs than their guided path counterparts. And the amount of money they're saving and the amount of borrowing lower that's happening, the lowered borrowing rate in FlexPath, pushes 60%, 58% for bachelor's programs, and the amount of borrowing and the actual billed tuition is far less. So that's
Amazing.
thing one. Thing two about Capella is we do have a lot of employer partnerships, and that's another way that we learn about what is a professionally relevant competency. We have over 800 partners, and we do some incredible work in the communities as well, through our fellows program and other efforts. So that's really exciting. I think higher ed has often been a siloed sector away from other sectors, right? It's been a bit rarefied in that way, I think institutions of higher ed have to embed themselves in their communities, whether that's, like in the case of Capella, professional communities, right? Because we don't have physical locations, or physical locations. Gone are the days when higher education can just look at its own programs and be self-satisfied with having programs and graduates, right? We have to understand how our work helps or hinders people's ability to be successful in professions and in their communities, and understand the powerful contribution we can make and the awesome responsibility we have to do well by that. And I think the current conversations are moving in that direction, which is exciting to see. I just hope it moves a little bit faster.
I think we all do, which is why we have these conversations here on the EdUp Experience podcast. How do you like that for a transition? Let me outro my guest co-host first. You know him, you love him. He's John Farrar. He's the Director of Education at Google. John, welcome back. I know we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Joe. Great talking with you, Dick. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And our guest, your guest. He is Dr. Dick Senese. He is the president at Capella University. Dick, did you have a good time today here on EdUp?
I had a great time, Joe. Anytime. Willing to come on anytime.
We love it. We love you. With that, ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. It's time to
Level up.
The beginning of a new era in higher education begins with you. Order your copy of Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education by Kate Colbert, Dr. Joe Salustio, with contributions by Elvin Freitas. It's higher education's must-read book of 2022. Discover how you can seize the moment to change higher education forever. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, now available on Amazon. For bulk orders, contact Kate, Joe, or Elvin.